Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we introduce you, dear listener, to something new, usually something to watch, usually TV, and usually on a week-to-week basis. We are currently covering 3 shows here in the feed. Not something we normally do. There's a lot of recording, a lot of editing, a lot of logistics getting the co-hosts together, especially when they live internationally. But we will be down to 2 relatively soon because Paradise is only 1 week away from its grand finale, at least for season 1. A little bit of news. It has been renewed for season 2. As you would expect, the show has been pretty popular and almost certainly going to end on a cliffhanger considering how close we are to the end right now. And this penultimate episode is called The Day. And hoo boy, what an episode. This show's been slow going oftentimes, just drip feeding us the mystery from week to week, which is to be expected. But this episode is really the show at its best, despite some pretty silly things. And I'm going to break it down as we go forward. By the way, Darren will be joining in for the conversation. But given this episode, I have so many mostly moral quandaries about some of the decisions that are made and not nitpicking plot. I'm actually curious as to all of these moral dilemmas. What is the right thing to do? Really something that the show does try to delve into here at its best. So I think we're going to have a lot of conversation and possibly disagreements about some of the actions taken in this episode. And given the fact that's what I assume the conversation is going to be like, I'm going to do a quick rundown of the plot to make sure I cover all the bases and also to refresh myself as to what I want those conversation points to be. I'll start that breakdown in just a moment, but before then, a little bit of housekeeping. Anyone who's been listening for the past few weeks, we have had this challenge to try to get to 100 subscribers on YouTube. We are now over 60, so we're well on our way there. So if you haven't done so, please do subscribe to our channel on YouTube. I'll include the link in the show notes as usual. If you have feedback for us, feel free to email needssomeintroduction@gmail.com or post a comment on YouTube. Just published about a day ago, the second episode of The White Lotus. The White Lotus has been going a little slow so far, in my opinion. Not off to the hot start that season 2 was. But of course, I have a lot of faith in Mike White in general, and I do think it'll pay off in the end. And of course, Severance. I do anticipate, probably not this week, but next week, big revelations there on the show. Catch up if you haven't already. Oh, and one last bit of news on Paradise. If by chance you've been telling your friends and family to watch this show, and they don't have Hulu or Disney Plus, they've just announced they plan to run this starting in April on ABC. So this will be a week-to-week television broadcast. So pretty easy for everybody to watch. If you by chance don't have this, well then, don't listen to these spoilers. This is the type of show that has many, many spoilers. So not a casual listen for this podcast. We're going to spoil everything. Okay, so the 7th episode of the season. We're just one away from the finale. Pretty short season, obviously. The episode called The Day. For all of you who are waiting for the punchline, my sarcastic commentary on the 80s cover song that will punctuate something dramatic in the show, usually in a not very effective way. Well, they seem to know this is no kidding in this particular episode. This is by far the most straight-faced and earnest episode we've seen, apropos to the end of the human race, and therefore no silly 80s cover versions here. The framing device for this episode is a direct continuation of last week's episode. Xavier is with Sinatra, whose name we find out is Samantha here. We probably knew that already, but I forgot. And she's explaining some of what happened on that day, that very fateful day, about a year ago now, 2 years ago, and following up on the promise, of course, that Xavier's wife, Terry, is not actually dead. That nuclear strike in Atlanta did not actually happen. Despite the fact that this is supposedly Sinatra conveying this information to Xavier, we actually jump all the way back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think thematically important, this story, which may be apocryphal, but it is historically told, that the Soviet Union had told this submarine captain that if they were cornered, they should unleash all of their nuclear weapons on their targets, in the United States, of course. And he unilaterally decided to not do so. Of course, that is what's going to play out over the course of this episode. She starts to explain everything to Xavier, that there are people living on the surface. Those people we sent out there, I had them killed. I had to take care of them. Please don't ever take care of me, Miss Sinatra. And she laughs, scoffs at herself. Trust me, I'm not really a monster. Well, she's getting more and more monstrous here, which, by the way, side note here, I find this a less interesting version of the monster. But for the first time, the showrunners here, the creators of this show, definitely seem to be saying something about the culture at large, politics, etc. And maybe part of it is how someone with too much power, too much wealth, may become a monster. Being too isolated probably or definitely leads to a lack of empathy, let's say. And by definition, if you've become so wealthy and so powerful, you probably are extremely isolated. I mean, isolation leads to a lack of empathy even amongst people who don't have a lot of money. So money probably only exacerbates things, or at least gives you a lot more confidence that you are doing the right thing no matter what you do. Another little wink, nudge, audience, right? Am I right? A little political dig on the fact that, well, it's a good thing when the crisis is at hand that we have the right people in power. Very carefully vetted leadership at that point. Right, everybody? Right? This show, of course, was written and produced well over a year ago, I would assume. And of course, she mentions the fact that we have transistors out there, just radios out in the wild, and people are starting to call. She leaves, of course, until the very end of the episode, she leaves the really big revelation there with who's actually on those lines. And she happens to have those recordings on her. Darren had asked, well, what is that device she has in her hand? I actually thought it was a remote control or something. She was going to turn the TV on and show that she had kidnapped the daughter. But no, this is a recordings that she happens to carry with her of these people communicating from the surface. And Xavier's like, how is this possible? And she says the president did something on that day, Xavier. And we flash back to the day. So this is going to be one of the most Google terms. I've already done the Google, by the way, and I'm sure you have all as well if you've seen this episode. Is there actually a caldera under the South Pole? I do not believe there is. But according to this catastrophe here, this is the thing that they've been worried about. And it's actually specifically the thing that that scientist was speaking about. I had misread all of this, and I think Darren was much closer to the reality of this. I had suspected that all of that talking at that conference that Sinatra had witnessed, this was general threat. But no, apparently this is specifically the threat they have been preparing for, this eruption under the Antarctic, which has released a huge amount of water, apparently a hundreds feet tall wave. And this explains things, by the way. I was thinking in that visual we saw where the water showed the Washington Monument completely underwater, which is, of course, over 500 feet tall. And I was like, is this actually, where did this, how could you explain this? It seemed utterly preposterous. So I guess the explanation here is that the water released all at once, of course, created this shock wave of water apparently even higher than 500 feet across the surface of the Earth, and then shock waves, right? That wave, just like you would expect with a tsunami, but at a massive scale, would rush across the surface of the Earth, get to the North Pole, actually, and then shockwave back again. So you can imagine whatever wasn't decimated on the way out would be decimated on the way back and eventually settle down. But in the meantime, you can only imagine the amount of destruction. And this would be global. For anyone who's not aware of this, by the way, about 80% of all of the world population and also the US population lives in cities that are within a mile or so, within a few miles of a large body of water. So if water levels actually raise this high, it would wipe out the vast majority of the population of the Earth. And presumably that is what has happened. Of course, some of the details about the height of the wave and all these things come later on. I'm just kind of abbreviating it all here. Of course, Australia gets hit first. Poor Darren. Got to talk to him about this when he joins the conversation. So, of course, this wave is moving very quickly. Once again, not sure how scientifically accurate this would possibly be, even if something like this were to occur. A 5-hour wave reaching Washington, D.C., this wave would be moving at thousands of miles an hour, or 1,000 miles an hour at least. Xavier is trying to prepare for this evacuation of the president, simultaneously checking in on his kids who are already on their way to the airplane for their final transport to the mountain in Colorado, the Paradise compound. And of course, Terry is in Atlanta. She should not have gotten on that plane. I would have tied her down. When the president's telling you that there's going to be a worldwide apocalypse imminently, and wink, wink, nudge, nudge, don't fly in that plane, well then, take that as a sign. Do not get on the plane. Now, this is the first question I'd love to get feedback from Darren on. This is a very cynical view of what, or maybe of politicians in general, because this isn't just the U.S. that is contemplating nuclear apocalypse on all targets worldwide. Even early on, we indicate that there's some bombing occurring near the Chinese border. They're not certain if it came from China or not. There are missiles headed towards the United States eventually in the episode as well. Almost certainly coming from Russia, considering the direction they show on the satellite, but they seem to not even be able to clarify exactly where they're coming from. So this idea that something globally catastrophic is about to happen and that the reaction would be to react in a completely cynical manner. You even hear very briefly here where people are thinking, well, if Florida gets wiped out, then what does it do to the electoral map? Thinking about like, what is going to be the delegate count with the next election? Not seeing the forest for the trees here, people. Very pointed, by the way, this idea that it's not just blaming the politicians. It's not just blaming how this collapse would immediately lead to an acceleration towards the end when neighboring enemies are starting to bomb each other with nuclear weapons. But it also has some critique here of the fact that you hear these voices on the channel, like not accepting the brutality of what is to come. And of course, you see these journalists being like, well, I'm going to get on top of this building. I'll be safe up here. I'm going to go fly to the location where the wave is going to hit. The assumption that they're going to be protected somehow, or even when someone's saying, no, the wave is this tall, it's going to wipe out everything. Even the powers that be in the show itself seem to not accept this. So I am curious to see if he thinks this is a realistic portrayal or maybe an overly cynical portrayal of how people would actually behave. Back in the show itself, at this point, they're just seeing that Australia is pretty much completely underwater. Florida is going to be hit within 2 hours. South Africa, of course, they mentioned how that has been hit, would be one of the first places hit, obviously, considering its location. Meanwhile, Cal is trying to get a head count, a vote, go or no go for Versailles. Of course, this is the evacuation plan. We see that same scientist that encountered it in the past. He's one of the last people standing as far as this broadcast goes. I mean, I guess if you know the end is nigh, then what else can you do? Maybe he's on some mountaintop somewhere because he's planned ahead because he saw this coming. So hopefully he did what he could to protect himself. Or maybe he's inside the mountain or near the mountain because he was one of the architects of its design. Of course, as we've seen in previous episodes, there's already rumors about this billionaire bunker in Colorado, as they're calling it, and people are starting to surround the place. They've already been there now even more anxiously, preparing for the worst or anticipating it at this point. And even as a matter of fact, it becomes one of the targeted nuclear strike locations later. His pre-planned script was that it's not going to be as bad. It's going to be bad, everybody, but stay calm. We got this all under control. Of course, this is all a lie, but the intention is to calm the populace. Meanwhile, we see a skyscraper-tall wave smashing into another city on the TV broadcast. It is telling that Cal, when he's about to prepare to speak, has a little bit of a tremor, but a little bit of alcohol takes care of that. Looks like you've been drinking a little too much there, Cal. A little delirium tremens, possibly. Terry's trying to get out of Atlanta. They're grounding all the flights. Xavier's desperately trying to get Cal's attention. He needs his help to get his wife out. We seem to see somebody on TikTok unboxing one of these bracelets, which is interesting that they're going public with this. This goes back to something that Darren had speculated on. Are these people all VIPs, or is this some kind of selection that's been done by Tarabi? Unclear, of course, what the process was of vetting the people who are going to go to Colorado. Once again, touching on the pettiness of some of these arguments, there's still a political argument as to whether climate change is real or not, which, regardless of whether this is climate change related or not, and this scientist does seem to claim that melting the ice sheet, of course, made it more permeable, which, of course, led to this disaster, or at least made it worse. I do still find it funny that they're still trying to score talking points on whether climate change is real or not, even with an 800-foot wave headed their way. Also, that they're still very concerned with swearing on the air when this may be the last TV broadcast anyone sees for 100 years. Cal is getting escorted out, just like it's been practiced for weeks now. We saw a preview of it last week. But he sees one of the workers there, still cleaning up after everybody. He's seen him twice now in this episode. And he realizes he's not that scared. And again, another thing that is definitely a critique here. When every news cycle has some new catastrophe, it does seem to feel like it's hard to tell when something really matters and when it's just another scare tactic to generate ratings. Cal makes what seems to be a noble decision to go back and then make the announcement. Everybody, this is really happening. You need to be with your loved ones. You're probably not going to be able to escape it. It's too late. So decide how you want to spend your last moments and who you want to spend them with. Once again, on paper, very noble. And I did like this a lot because it asks another question. What is the right thing to do? Can't wait to hear Darren's feedback on this. I'm not sure this was the right thing to do. It is endangering the people that are going to escape. It's going to make the escape more difficult. It's going to take longer to get those planes off the ground, which of course potentially leads to one of those plane crashes. Unsure if that would have happened either way, but he did eat up part of their escape time. And now these people are truly panicking. Even the people around him, if he was assuming that this is a noble thing to do and people deserve to know, there is really no right answer here. And I do find it an interesting moral quandary that the show brings up yet again. Cal gets ready to make that honorable gesture, only a gesture, I think, in my opinion, but he needs a cup of coffee. Maybe it's because of all that drinking. He needs a little coffee to even him out. And Xavier, of course, anticipates that things are going to escalate. And it does. We see his chief of staff, or someone who's been with him this whole entire time, didn't make the cut apparently. Her kids are going to die. She's going to die. This is a very bitter pill. Xavier's betrayed her too by not warning her. So everybody is very morally compromised here at this point. And before you know it, the guns start going off. This is a very tense sequence. Out by the helicopter, the person carrying the nuclear football is shot and killed by someone in the crowd. And even this new Secret Service agent pulls a gun on Xavier. And once again, speaking of the moral compromises here that maybe the show can engage with, but at least raises, even if it's not doing a great job of doing it, I find this moral gray area here very interesting to me. When Robinson shoots that agent, Xavier is angry at her, saying, "You didn't need to shoot him." When the reality is that he is going to die one way or the other. And just trying to keep your hands clean in the moment doesn't change that reality. Continuing this simple moral certitude that maybe Xavier needs to surrender and maybe has not been able to, and maybe that's been his Achilles heel throughout this entire series, he refuses to leave without his wife. And Cal starts to tell him, "You need to get on that plane." And then he accuses Cal of not having told him enough, which is probably true. But then again, they thought they had a little more runway here. And this is another bitter pill to swallow as well, but legitimate. If he stays behind and dies, and his wife dies, then his kids are simply orphaned. He needs to get on that plane. That shockwave hits at that moment. One of the planes goes down, which basically has the Joint Chiefs of Staff are on there, the entire, I think the Congress is on there, the entire judiciary. And this is when Cal has to make another very tough decision. He has the nuclear football. There are nuclear weapons headed towards the United States, including Colorado. They're not certain if it's going to hit one of the cities or hit their compound. And Cal has to decide, is he going to start a all-out nuclear war, bomb everybody? By the way, doesn't change the fact that there's a nuclear weapon headed towards Colorado, and almost certainly others, even if they discharge all the ones that they have. So what's the right thing to do here? Of course, MacGuffin is the right thing to do here. We have the Blue MacGuffin, a global EMP network that could disable momentarily all of the electronic devices around the world. He refuses to add to this worldwide nuclear war. Once again, this is a very cynical view of the world. If we're going to die anyway, we're going to kill you all at the same time. Maybe this is true. Or maybe you believe when there are many more limited resources that you want to make sure they're all left for you. But once again, bombs go in both directions. So if they do, I'm not sure if this is the strategic thing to do. According to Sinatra, they've run all these simulations, and it always leads to nuclear war. So once again, very cynical view, at least of the computer models that are running these simulations. And that's what Cal does. He uses this EMP device to knock out all of the electronic devices around the world, including the computers on those nuclear missiles. And because of that, Atlanta was not bombed, Colorado was not bombed. Now, how exactly was Terry able to get to a height, to an altitude that prevented the wave hitting, still remains to be seen. By the way, the whole thing where Cal says, I wanted to know everything about the JFK assassination, Bigfoot, UFOs, all of that stuff was in the trailer for this show, which of course was a teaser and a misdirect for the direction the show would actually go into. But I do find it funny that he finally says it here. And by the way, none of those things are real. But this is real, this catastrophic world-ending natural event, and this made-up worldwide linked EMPs, even in countries where we have no technological presence or very limited. Nonetheless, whatever, it works. Cal actually has pretty limited power across the board, but I do like the fact that he has all the power in that room momentarily, and he says if she doesn't leave, shoot her, to his security guard. And of course, this is all playing out. Sterling K. Brown giving a great performance here on the phone with Terry. This is all heartbreaking. He obviously thinks she's about to die. He tries to comfort her. He says, you have to be a good father. Really a beautiful scene. And then we flash forward back into the series itself, the timeline of the series. Back at Paradise, Sinatra and him standing off. It's happening out there. People are rebuilding, including plays the audio recording of the wife, Terry, looking for Xavier Collins. This is a very on-the-nose recording, by the way. Are we sure this wasn't generated by AI or something before all the computers got blown away? By the way, even with an EMP, electronics would start working again. A lot of them would be fried, but eventually things would start working again. You could probably take a few computers apart and get them running once again pretty quickly, get some operational technology. Of course, the internet now, that's a little more complicated when you've blown out the entire network, but you can use radio signal. So technology exists to rebuild the outside world. I actually think about this a lot, is like, how would we rebuild if something catastrophic happened? We probably would have, the knowledge to rebuild much of the world, but it would take a really long time. Just the infrastructure would take so long to get rebuilt. Despite the fact that Sinatra is this James Bond villain at this point, very much so. No, Mr. Bond, I want you to die. And of course, evil Sinatra has one more thing up her sleeve. Not only carrot and stick once again. You can see your wife. Carrot, here's the stick. Your daughter, she's been kidnapped. I got her. Oh, a couple of interesting points here. She mentions the DNA of the assassin, not a resident of Paradise. Someone from the outside, someone of this Order of the Rose, somehow connected to Cain, theoretically, was the actual perpetrator of the murder. And she says to him, you're going to give me back my guns, you're going to release all my people, and you're going to find out who killed Cal. Yet another very bitter pill. She says, maybe I am a monster. She's starting to feel herself big time here. And that's where we leave things, with just the one more episode to go. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of cliffhangers here, everybody. And we, of course, have still not found out what that 6-digit number is. All right, so that's the relatively brief recap of the plot. Now I need to talk to Darren about all of these moral quandaries. And of course, how does he feel? Australia being wiped off first. Does he have the confidence to rebuild society after the apocalypse? Who did the right thing and who did the wrong thing? Primarily, I think that's what we're going to talk about. Who's doing the right thing and who's doing the wrong thing here? And my last question is, I would personally shoot Sinatra in the head right at this moment, because leaving her alive is only going to lead to more trouble. I know she supposedly has, or definitely has, the daughter kidnapped currently, but I think I could talk my way out of that later. And this woman is a current threat. She's nothing but trouble. And I mean, that's my decision. Anyway, let's see what Darren has to say. I have these questions and more. Oh, another question I have is, what exactly is going on? We hear on the news that there's some other natural disasters occurring. There's a giant earthquake on the west coast of the United States. And there's rumors of other volcanoes erupting, etc., around the world. So what exactly is happening worldwide? Seems to be more than just this one eruption in Antarctica. And how have people been able to survive this at all? So let's get into that conversation after this short break. So Darren, I actually recorded like a 20-minute walkthrough of the plot, and I did that on purpose because I wanted us to basically just have a conversation about this really fascinating episode, I have to say. And I wanted to get your impressions of it, obviously. But I have so many philosophical questions. And some of these things were brought up in kind of clunky ways, but still, it made me think. And that's kind of where I think the conversation will probably go. So trying to go scene by scene seemed a little tedious given what I think the tone of this episode was, which very curious to know what you thought of it. I thought this worked really well.
Yeah, I thought it was a stunning piece of television, to be honest. I was captivated the whole way.
Yeah, thrilled. Mm-hmm.
Thrilling, right from the start, I think. And the title of the episode was, what was it? It was That Day?
Or That Day, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The Day. And I was like, yes, we finally get some answers. We finally get to see what happens. The point of view that it took and the fact that it was focused on the president and Xavier and just the close people involved, the intricacies of what happened on the day. I was fascinated. I was stunned, and I thought it was. This is what you watch television for. I think this is why you go through a couple of the slow episodes to get to something like this, which delivers in almost every way. Yeah.
It's funny because, well, just to call it out immediately, well, a couple of things. One is that the framing device, when we see Sinatra fully embrace her monsterness and, really becoming like a James Bond villain, actually saying that she's becoming like a James Bond villain, there's a little campiness there that, of course, the show, we've had a lot of humorous takes on different elements of the show. These writers, by the way, have written a lot of comedies, so there definitely is some intentional comedy here and some just TV-ness of the show. But all the stuff in the flashback is dead earnest and thrilling. I was uncomfortable at different times. I was enthralled, like you mentioned, just the thinking in my head, like, what would I do in these circumstances? And some of the scenes were really emotionally powerful. And they had none of the campiness that we've seen in previous episode. Not even, by the way, no covers of any 80s songs.
That just came to me then. Yes, that's what a stunning revelation.
The biggest shock of all. What's going to be the credit? What plays during the credit? Nothing. Just that down-tempo background music that we've heard multiple times, mostly in this episode.
Yeah, Sinatra does come clean at the end. Oh, I sound like a Bond villain, so it lightens the whole affair. Genuinely touching, I thought, and filmed very straight. That whole flashback, there's so much to talk about in it. It was just, it was fantastic. Yeah. What did you think? So the episode started with the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the kind of ending to that. What did you think of that? And was that situation a true story?
I believe, I don't think this is 100% historically accurate, but it is one of those stories that gets told over and over again. So there must be there may be some kernel of truth to it. But I think that what they're representing there, of course, is that in that particular instance, if that story is to be believed, that this Russian captain had the choice of basically, if cornered, fire on the US. And of course, the fallout of all of that, literal fallout, of course, but also just the general fallout of all of that, the dominoes that would start falling from there. And he decided unilaterally, no, I will not do that. And of course, that is, in a way, the decision that Cal makes here as well. So I think that's the metaphor they're going with there. I do find it interesting that obviously this is, there's politics kind of subtly laced in here, but this one's probably the most aggressively so, where there's that piece of dialogue where it's like, well, it's a good thing we have a steady hand at the controls in a situation like this. Of course, these scripts were probably written well over a year ago, and this show was probably shot well over a year ago. So it's, not as on the nose as it seems, but hey, always a question that we ask ourselves.
And the steady hand only comes from because he's a drunk, so he just needs that shot of alcohol.
That's an excellent point, by the way. That as far as the steady hand comes, literally in the show, it is that he takes that drink and is just like, oh, my delirium tremens. The only time, all I got to do is a shot of alcohol. Look, does the trick every time. And then asks for a cup of coffee. By the way, I'm not sure if that's the right combination.
Yeah, true. I feel like I've seen that standoff with a Russian submarine captain somewhere in films before, maybe a Mission Impossible or
The Hunt for an October. Have you seen Hunt for an October?
Is that
such
where
a
I've
great
seen
film?
it?
Yeah. Anybody out there, watch that. So it's so incredible.
Stunning opening and very thought-provoking. The caldera. So we worked it out. We found out what it is. A caldera. So I haven't looked that word up. I've heard the word before, but it's a good word.
We had our honeymoon, by the way, on the lip of the caldera on the Greek islands. It's pretty incredible view there.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Really
and that's an active volcano or former volcano or volcano?
It is not. That one is not active as far as I know, but it's pretty fascinating that the island is, the rim of the caldera. So you really get a feel for just how immense the hole itself was, the opening, because you're, basically driving along the lip of the volcano. But no, not active. But I was I joked on the recap area, the little segment I recorded, saying that I wonder how many people are Googling today. Is there a caldera under the Arctic? Turns out there is not. But for anybody who doesn't know this, I'm aware of this. I watched some documentary on Discover or something years ago. They had a documentary about the fact that we have a caldera under Yosemite in the United States. And if it blows, it would not only basically liquefy half of the United States, it would basically be a nuclear winter for the rest of the world. At least we wouldn't have to worry about all that flooding, but it'd still be pretty catastrophic. There are possible similar situations here. Of course, in the show, it has to be under the Antarctic so that when all that water liquefies, it also creates hundreds of feet of water. Australia goes pretty quick, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, we're pretty close to Antarctica, that's for sure.
I think you guys got an hour or two before you got wiped out. It's pretty rough.
Yeah, that's right. Well, all our population is on the coast, so yeah, we'd be gone pretty quickly. Most of our population, anyway. And we brought back the climate scientist from his dismal presentation that no one attended. Suddenly, everyone's listening to him, and he's a riveting talking head on the television, isn't he?
What did you think about this satire on the news that people are like, oh, I'm going to go climb up top of the skyscraper to cover this story, like not taking it seriously, even when it's imminent, or how petty everybody is, saying like, don't swear on CNN. He's just like, what are you talking about? We're all going to be dead in 5 minutes. Calm down. Like, this is not the time to be worried about language on TV.
We didn't get to see, which is interesting in this episode, we didn't get to see any of the real general public or any cutaways from people watching TV at home or anything apart from what was happening in the room at the time, which was obviously a choice. This show likes to focus on these characters. So it was good to get a sense of what the journalists are doing out there and how people would possibly cover it. And yeah, I mean, if you only had 2 hours and you're on a foreign assignment and maybe you're not with your family, you would go and stand on a building and get a camera and see what happens.
Oh, I mean, I think in her case, she actually thought she was announcing that she's safe. But I agree with what you're saying. If you really thought this is the end of the world, and like you said, you have like a small crew and you don't have your family around you, then it's like, hey, might as well go out in a blaze of glory.
That's right. Yeah. So she was, that journo was on top of a building in Jakarta, which faces north, I guess. And so she was like, completely fine. Nothing is going to happen to us here.
Right. And then an 800-foot wave comes.
And quite effective, actually. I mean, you didn't need too much CGI to convey something quite frightening.
Yeah, I think it's actually better this way. This is, the rather than dodgy CGI we've seen in some of those movies we actually mentioned. One of these asteroid films that
Deep Impact,
Deep Impact, exactly. Especially nowadays. But although I got to tell you that special effects now, especially if it's quick for like a TV show, I think the old ones are actually better. I don't know how special effects have gotten worse, but they apparently have. That's an example of some pretty cheesy special effects and better than trying to spend a fortune on it or just put some bad CGI there. The fact that you basically just see the hint of the wall and it's a darkened, and it's also on a TV screen. So it's going to have these layers of screens. You could get away with a lot in that instance. And I think they did a pretty good job of conveying that's probably what it would be like. The signal will be cutting out and still terrifying, of course.
I agree that some CGI has gotten worse. I can't believe it. I mean, obviously they're going for the lowest quote to get these things done in a quick amount of time.
And all these CGI companies, this is totally off topic, but just reading this week that all these CGI companies, even the most elite ones in the world, are all like on the verge of bankruptcy. So I don't understand how mismanaged this is, considering everybody needs the service and no one's providing it well, and they're all going broke. I'm not sure how this is happening. Yeah,
well, plenty of shows require it or seem to require it, but maybe be a bit more creative and show these things that make a bit more sense rather than going over the top. So starting with all these decisions that are made that on paper seem to make sense, or this was a very interesting aspect of the show. I really didn't think would explore these ideas as much as they did, but I love this idea of the question that's being asked. Obviously, Xavier in this particular case is really angry because he feels like he should have gotten more warning. They thought they had more time and it didn't really
happen that way. They didn't get this initial earthquake or whatever they were expecting to get. Apparently just blew up without warning. But he had, like I said last week, he was winking pretty hard when he was saying, don't let her go to Atlanta. So, I mean, those are warning signs. But maybe he had been warning him for a very long time. Regardless, the interesting part of it becomes when this back and forth starts between Xavier and other folks as well. This idea of saying you should have told everybody that there was going to be an extinction level event within the next 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. They should have been forewarned. And I think this is a philosophical question to ask. Is that the right thing to do? Because if you know you're going to be dead within the next 6 months, maybe you could just say, I'm just going to sit home with my family. But in a way, is it kinder to just let it happen rather than, letting people worry that at any time their life could end? I can only imagine what the suicide rate would have been if he had made this announcement 6 months ago.
I agree. And we saw when he did come clean to the public that everything went to shit straight away.
Immediately, right.
So can you imagine 6 months? Yeah, society would be absolutely ruined. Also, the international forces or the international countries seemed to have no warning as well. I thought that was very interesting that it seemed like China and Russia were going for a land grab to try to get high altitude areas at the very last minute to try to continue some semblance of life after this has occurred. So no one had warning, which seems a bit silly. You'd think if America had a bit of warning, you'd think these other countries have a bit of warning too. Obviously, maybe they've got their own underground bunkers.
Right, possibly.
Countries like China, you'd think that they would amass an army to secure different areas of land to try to do things a bit more extensive. But yeah, fascinating. I did ask my kids what they would do if they had 2 hours left, but their answers were pretty silly.
What did they say?
My oldest daughter said, she really wanted to taste the dishwasher tablets. She really wanted to understand what they taste like before her life ended. And my son went, he just wants to do some push-ups. I was like, okay.
I may have to cut that out of the episode to tell you.
That's fine.
Very, very disappointed with those answers, I have to say.
Very shocking.
Push-ups would not be what I would be planning to do.
No.
Want to look good on the way out.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Teenagers.
You said a couple of things that I wanted to circle back to. Oh, yeah. It seems weird that somehow, this guy's been speaking out about this, and you would figure that somewhere, even if most governments were not taking it super seriously or just thought there was like a % chance of this happening, somebody's been taking some kind of precautions. But it is interesting to think that, and maybe this is the next question I want to ask you, this is a pretty cynical view. And honestly, this is the cynicism of like The Walking Dead, as an example, is something that turned me off to that show. And this is a little cynical because maybe and maybe there'll be a corrective once we see that people are surviving on the outside. So maybe this is intentionally showing us only a cynical view of what could be happening out there and the way that the media would be covering it, for example. So maybe all of this is text in the show. But from just the evidence we see here, this is a pretty cynical take on the fact that everybody would just start bombing each other. And like, I mean, me personally, I can't imagine that mindset of being like, we don't know what % of the population will be left at the end of this. And we start to strategically bomb each other. But it isn't even that. People start saying, if Florida gets wiped off the map, because they don't even realize, or maybe they're not accepting how cataclysmic this actually is. They're only thinking about Florida getting inundated with water. They start thinking, well, what does this do to the electoral college? Like, what does it do to our re-election possibilities? That is an extremely cynical take that all people would be thinking about would be, what the election will look like next time, instead of thinking about the fact that, well, if 80% of the population is exterminated, I think we got bigger fish to fry rather than who wins the next election.
It was a good juxtaposition of the seriousness of DEFCON 3, DEFCON 2. I'm not quite sure. I have to ask you what those terms mean. And also just the casual humor of James Marsden. I mean, He won the episode. I think he was
Yeah, he's so
so
good in
good.
this. Yeah.
Oh, just plays to his strengths. And towards the end, when his chiefs of staff were in the opposite plane or another plane,
Yes.
and they were telling him he needs to start thinking about launching the weapons. And they're like, it's not for us. We're going down. We have to make an emergency landing. It's for you guys. It's for the remainder of the civilization. It's interesting what you would do and what these leaders do to try to, in the face of a cataclysmic event, what do you do? Do you launch the bombs? And it
Right.
seems like everyone
Exactly.
launches the bombs. But of course, James Marsden doesn't.
Well, because he has the MacGuffin in his back pocket.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that because, and also the scientific possibilities of that, a little science corner on that as well, because EMTs are been used in so many movies in the incorrect way, oftentimes. Just like, let's just say the reality of, having a nuclear attack and the fact that, Sinatra's there. Samantha, by the way, I'm not sure if we knew her name before, but now we do know it's Samantha. But she's there saying, look, we ran all the simulations and there's always a nuclear attack. We need to attack. And I don't even understand the logic of that, by the way. I don't understand that at that point, you're only worried about who wins this nuclear war, whatever happens at this point. Do we really want to add fuel to the fire? This is my particular point of view. But maybe I'm wrong in that. And that's what it made me wonder about myself. Maybe I would be like, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to make it even worse because who knows? We're going to bomb someplace, which is one of the few places where society can start to rebuild itself. Like, why would I do that? Like, just for humanity as a whole, like, why would I do this? But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we should just be thinking about like who wins this petty battle. Honestly, it feels so petty with these stakes so high.
It does. It does. And they did seem to see exactly where these nuclear warheads were going to hit all these major cities around the US. And I did mention in previous episodes that it could have been Russia that was bombing Atlanta. So
you were correct. Yeah. From the direction of it could be China also, but from the direction of the arrows, I would assume it's coming from Russia, which will be closer also. So,
and we did see the graphic that Atlanta got hit. But towards the end, maybe that wasn't the case. So maybe the graphics were lying to us. Sinatra just walked in to the president's office. He at the end, he goes, "Oh, you're dismissed." It's like, well, she wasn't invited anyway at the start. Have a discussion at the end of the world.
So we have a president and a egomaniacal billionaire on one plane, and on the other plane, the entire Congress and the judiciary has gone down in flames. This sounds like somebody's wet dream. I can't quite, my finger on who I might be talking about.
It's like when sporting teams fly across the country. They don't put the two teams on the one plane, do they? Because if that goes down, they both go down. Just an aside, James Marsden was talking about neckties.
Yes.
He wanted to change his tie. That was a really interesting thing that I possibly could go and Google. He said neckties have a history with Serbian mercenaries in the 1600s.
Yes.
So
I didn't realize that was the connection there, but interesting, right? Then we all wear them now.
I just like these little tidbits that get dropped in shows like this.
I did actually think about that in the moment. Not only that it was an interesting piece of trivia, it's just that he is dropping trivia all the time about Die Hard or whatever. Really now, Cal, is this the time to drop your trivia? And then, Cal decides to take off his tie and be honest with the public. And this seems to be an honorable thing to do. And it's very interesting to see the dynamic between him and Xavier. I thought this was really well handled because Xavier really starts to make an even more ridiculous, honorable decision later in the episode. And then Cal's the one who has to talk him out of it. But he's the one who immediately says, grab your guns and block the doors. This is going to get really ugly really fast. So he knows what Cal is about to unleash, and they barely make it to the helicopter, obviously. But then even Xavier makes some pretty silly decisions. I like the fact that Xavier's trying to, rationalize with that guy, the young Secret Service agent. Robinson just shoots him in the head. He's like, I was trying to talk him down. And I'm like, this guy's going to die. He knows he's about to die. Like I mean, I hate to be so cold and calculating about it. Staying there and not getting the plane off the ground, the helicopter off the ground, is not doing anyone any favors.
It was his third day on the job too. So, geez,
Right.
what a
Quite a rough week.
yeah.
To get his first paycheck. That's pretty rough.
I'm not sure who he replaced. I'm going to go with it that that's how people could possibly react, but I'm not quite sold that everybody would start brandishing weapons and trying to get a seat on a helicopter that possibly has a way out. I don't know about that, but it did make for very dramatic television and a great intro to Robinson too, and how just ruthless she is. And also the scene
or practical.
Yeah, the scene with Xavier's friend at the office, or the president's not chief of staff, but his friend that was there, who her son needs his medication. I mean, that's a bit of a heartbreaking situation, and the way that she kind of spits almost in Xavier's face about her situation. I mean, we'll go with it for dramatic points, but I'm not sure if I was fully sold on that. I mean, that's just to make Xavier feel terrible. Even more terrible.
Even more terrible.
Yeah.
As silly as some of these things are, I actually didn't mind it because I like the ideas behind it. He's saying, I was telling him to put down his gun. I almost convinced them. Okay, so she shot him in the head. That's terrible. But what if he had laid down his gun and then sat there and waited an hour for the wave to come and drown him? That would be better. Like, it's just, everyone's making a devil's bargain here. And it also drives home the fact that everybody living in paradise right now, this is the experience they went through, right? So they all lied to people. They all betrayed people. When they were escaping, they were watching people dying outside, not even like dying, like, I know they're going to die and maybe I can just look away and pretend it's not happening. People are being shot so that they can get on the plane. This is the what led to their current circumstance. So you can only imagine how traumatized these people are.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating to see people make decisions in life or death moments, split second decisions. Like, I recently did a first aid course and they said some people act and some people freeze. So it's like your fight or flight response. But those people that freeze, they're useful. So you could direct them to call emergency services or do so. So everyone's useful in a situation. But yeah, people like Xavier are trained to act and they're trained to make super fast decisions. So it's really interesting to see how quickly he makes the decision and how he just goes after it. Guard the door, get the weapons. It's great to see in action.
You can't really rewire your nature if you're a freeze rather than an act person. A lot of immersion can slightly change it, but I'm pretty sure everybody who gets to this point, they have been vetted that they are not going to freeze up, because that's the last thing you need in this particular circumstance.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, he is the man in charge, the Secret Service agent in charge of the president, and has form with taking a bullet for him. So, yeah, he's a man of action for sure.
So my question to you is, okay, so is it the moral thing for Cal to be honest with everybody and say, hang on to your loved ones and good luck, if you survive? That seems, I think we agree, that's the moral thing to do, but was it the right thing to do when you think about the consequence?
It doesn't seem like the right thing to do, does it?
I agree.
And the fact that his poor old cleaner, which is a great character, a very lovely character that they introduced, and it was actually quite a touching scene between the president and the cleaner of the White House, who's been there through many, many administrations. Very touching, and that is what changes his mind. But it's clearly the wrong thing to do, and the waves of just tragedy just resonate as soon as he is honest with everybody, and you can just imagine what would happen in the general public, or if anything would happen if you watch TV and that happened. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't be watching the news. People get their information from other areas. Did you notice there was like a quick TikTok or something about, my friends got these wristbands. They got them 3 weeks ago. I thought that was an interesting little aspect. So the word has gone out that there's these special wristbands around and something is going to happen, and everybody is possibly waiting for this imminent event.
That's a little bit of social commentary there. You see that cleaner at the White House, who's been there for 40 years practically, that he's like, oh, you know what? They're always freaking out about something, which of course I know people who basically watch the news like that all the time. And understandably, by the way, but I think there's a little commentary there of like, when you're hysterical all the time, it's very hard to judge what is real and what is not. And then also this, he's deciding that I can't let that lay. I'm going to have to make it, have to make a difference. But yeah, I totally agree that overall, this is the wrong thing to do because of the chaos that ensues, because it doesn't save anybody's lives. As a matter of fact, it might make things worse potentially. I guess if everybody had known for a long time and everybody could be trusted to stay calm, realistically, so many people, I mean, we have it every single year here when hurricanes come through and people say, yeah, they say it's going to be bad, and they stay in their homes and then they get washed away. Dozens of people die, oftentimes more. When there's really a huge, I mean, we get some really giant hurricanes recently. I wonder, do you guys get hurricanes? What would the storms be called in your region?
Yeah, we call them cyclones. I think they
Cyclones.
spin the opposite direction in the southern hemisphere. It's normally near the top of Australia where there's it's a bit more tropical. Yep.
And do you get have they storms gotten more aggressive recently?
Possibly. There's not huge population centers up there, not huge cities, so it's less threatening. And then as soon as they hit landfall, they just disappear. Yeah,
it's been more pronounced here. It has definitely gotten worse. So like every single year, you have people who say, "Oh, they always say it's going to be bad," and then their house gets blown away, and then they stay there, and they're like, "No, we got hit last year. There's no way we're going to get hit again," and then they get hit again. It's become much more aggressive. Recently we've had 3 or 4 of the biggest hurricanes just in the past 4 or 5 years. But you think about people like that who are not evacuating when things clearly seem to be catastrophic. So you do wonder if a lot of people would not react in time, but then it would give certain people who are taking it seriously chances to go to the mountains, for example, like Deep Impact, right? That's literally what you see, these people working their way to the mountain. There is that aspect to it, but I don't know. I mean, I think that there probably would be a lot of chaos. And in this particular case, I mean, in this particular moment, it is absolutely the wrong thing for him to do. Because, I mean, you think about that second plane that goes down. I mean, if they had taken off half an hour earlier, the plane wouldn't have crashed, right? So that is a direct death that he caused in that second plane.
From the shock wave or the sound wave that was coming ahead of the actual tsunami. Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting. I mean, I'm trying to think of a news event. I mean, 9/11 is probably a news event that's happened in our lifetime that you did feel like something very, very heavy was happening. I mean, were people freaking out while watching the news coverage in certain places in America? I mean, we were just transfixed, but certainly weren't freaking out. I mean,
9/11 was very interesting. I was obviously living right here, and I have friends who worked right near where the tower went down. And I remember seeing it in real time on TV while I was at work. And everybody was so calm. We were so calm. I went back to my desk. I tried to call everybody I knew in New York. Couldn't get through. All the lines were busy. Once the second tower went down, I immediately just left work. I didn't even announce it. I was just like, I don't know why I'm here. Why I've got to get out of here. So I left work and we went to the Red Cross. Me and a friend of mine, we met up at the Red Cross to give blood. Not that they needed it, unfortunately, because no one really survived. Everybody was calmly waiting online. We were talking to each other, and it was very controlled. My friend, who was right down the street when it happened, when the second tower went down, they all just started to walk in the same direction. They went over the bridge into Brooklyn to get as far away from the blast zone as they could. And they were very calm, and bodegas went outside and gave them all cold drinks. And then eventually the phone started working again, and people got picked up or walked their way back home or got cabs or whatever. And so that's the particular circumstance there. But I do think it's a very different type of experience, because we didn't think like, if I don't take action right now, I'm going to be dead. And then it's more honestly what you see where the hurricane is imminently there. like we saw recently. And now all of a sudden, all these people are literally stuck on a bridge with all their cars because there's only one way in and off of this island, for example. And then that could get heated. Although even there, we don't see things get violent. Maybe people would, maybe this is a more cynical version of that. Maybe what people would do is just hope for the best and say, maybe it won't be so bad, and just try to help each other out. I do hope that in a real circumstance like that, people would help each other out. And that's like, for example, with 9/11, once again, you see videos of this, people covered in dust being pulled out from under cars by other people in business suits. Everybody just kind of walked around and looked around and asked, are you in there? They tried to dig people out of buildings that had collapsed. You know, despite The Walking Dead and shows like that, people do not seem to immediately turn on each other given the first chance. But I do hope that that is more reality, given if something catastrophic happened.
That's quite heartwarming, actually, to find out that everybody kind of, the positive nature of human beings comes out, and you want to help and you want to be kind and you want to talk and communicate rather than explode into violence, as we see in every TV
exactly
and film show, because it's more dramatic. Yeah. Something happens and you just talk to someone that you've never talked to and you would never think of talking to. You just strike up a conversation. How's this? What's this? How's this affecting you?
About 2 years after 9/11, we had a blackout that hit the entire Northeast. So all of New York City, my whole entire area, all blacked out. And a similar thing happened. Like, once again, not to shout out just cynical political views or media outlets, but on Fox News, they were laughing it up, saying like, those people in New York are all going to burn that city down and cut each other's throats and steal everybody's stuff. That is not what happened at all. Same friends of mine who lived in the city had gone through 9/11. They hung out outside. The police set up their police lights at the park. Everybody hung out at the park. People had like battery powered DJ stations. People were breakdancing together and playing music. The bodegas were once again giving out all their ice cream because their power was out, and just giving out all the refrigerated goods to the people in the streets so that they wouldn't go to waste. And it was a big party. My friend, who's a marathon runner, decided to go for a half marathon run completely naked through the city of the streets. So it was in the dark practically, or around the rim of the park while the park was lit up, just because he could get away with it. And a lot of people, by the way, a lot of people in New Jersey could not get back because the ferry was, if you see the videos of this, the ferries were completely packed with people and going back and forth and back and forth. There was no way they could clear out the hundreds of thousands of people that were stuck there. So they just hung out overnight, and the hotels opened up their lobbies. The hotels opened up empty rooms for people to crash in. And it was the exact opposite. I think they said there was like one store had like a window broken open and people stole some sneakers. I think it was one incident in the whole entire city with 10 million people in it. So the world, people, I know it's so easy to believe what you hear, that we will just eat each other alive given the first opportunity. I don't believe this. And maybe I'm naive. I don't believe it.
That's so fascinating, but also so boring.
It is. It's no one's going to watch my version of the news.
We want riots. We want looters. That's fantastic. That's very heartwarming, Victor. That's given me hope for humanity.
And I really do sometimes tell my nephew when they get really cynical, or my wife when she gets extremely cynical about just how horrible so sometimes the news can be, for sure. Obviously, there are things, real significant things, global warming, etc., that are real threats that we need to be aware of, and, you know, foreign actors as well. We have to be wary, of course. You know, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish about like everything's great. I'm not a hippie. It does quite the opposite, by the way. But I don't know, given the fact that whenever I've seen something get really bad, there's always somebody there who's trying to help out. Maybe once you're running out of food, or when it's down to you or your neighbor surviving, yeah, things will get bad. I'm not going to deny that. You might have to make some tough choices, but I'm not sure that everyone's going to immediately start detonating nuclear bombs on each other. Just to correlate back to the show here, I think that is a bridge too far. Maybe people would think, I'm not sure I'm going to go bomb all the prime real estate in that other country, because maybe that is where like society is going to rebuild itself. So if I'm going to be the killer of all of humanity, maybe I think twice. That's all I'm saying.
What's DEFCON 3, DEFCON 2, DEFCON 1? What do you know what the levels are of those?
That usually relates to nuclear war, and it depends on what your like readiness is for nuclear attack. I think DEFCON 4, I think, is attack is imminent. So you're basically saying how ready you are for. So for example, once again, I might be on the wrong end of the scale here, but the lowest scale, whichever one that is, let's say it's DEFCON 1, I might be traveling the wrong direction on that scale, by the way.
Yeah, I think they were going down. Yeah.
What down was worse, right? So yeah, so I think DEFCON 4 is like no threat at all. I think we're always at DEFCON 3. Recently, there's always some slight wariness always. So I think we're always at 3. I think we haven't been at 4 in a long time. And then 2 is ready to fire. And then 1 would be like we are anticipating a nuclear attack at any time. You have the silos ready to fire at that point.
Wow. And the football is a real thing. And that there is a guy that carries the football around with the president all the time.
Yeah, wherever the president is, there's always a guy with the football. Yep, always.
Incredible.
In case they have to detonate to fire all the nuclear weapons. I don't believe it's a unilateral thing, by the way. I think that there is a pretty fascinating podcast I listened to where they run these drills where you have 2 people inside of the silos underground, and they have 1 key each, and they need to turn the key simultaneously. When they get the order, they are supposed to fire the weapons. Oftentimes in these test drills, they do not. They're like, I'm not sure I'm willing to kill millions of people. So, this is more fictionalized, this idea that I push this button, even though like I just detonated, or I guess he hasn't detonated the EMT device yet. If nuclear weapons are going off and conduit for communication from the football to wherever it's going, the idea that a trigger is fired immediately, it's not. There is some firewall there. There are humans there that have to make that decision.
Oh wow! So they think that they are turning the key and killing hundreds of thousands of people in this psychological test, or
yes,
or not?
I'll see if I can find the podcast. I listen to so many podcasts. If I can find the podcast about these 2 men who were interviewed about it, this is like they did this many many years ago. I'll put it in the show notes if I can locate it, because it's pretty fascinating. And yes, they believe they actually think that if they pull the lever, they're going to detonate. They're going to fire those weapons.
Wow,
they're supposed to, right? That's what they're being tested for.
That's their job. Yeah.
Back to the show, there's a few other things that I think are kind of interesting. We get to this moment where Xavier now is not going to get on the plane. Only been able to talk to his wife a few times. She talks very sad. He's like, steal a car. She's like, I even stole a car. I still couldn't make it. Apparently she did, but at that moment she had not made it. And he's, devastated by this, obviously. This, I think, is him making like a dumb, or at least rationalizing things in a pure and, once again, an honorable thing for him to say, I will refuse to get on that plane without my wife. But Cal, of course, says that their kids are going to be orphans. Like, you can't survive this. She won't survive this. Like, your kids are on that plane. You got to get on that plane. I'm saying that out loud, by the way, when Cal is saying it. I'm like, absolutely, get on that plane. What are you doing? I'm on board with that rationale for sure. By the way, if that was Terry'd be like, goodbye, I'm getting on the plane with the kids.
Same. Yeah, no second thoughts. Maybe a little bit of a tear, possibly a single tear.
You cry about it afterwards, sure. It's devastating. But at that moment, it's like, my kids are on that plane. I'm getting on the plane. That's it. Get out of my way. He's going to knock out Xavier to get on the plane.
I was proud of his wife that she stole a car. She seemed like the woman that could do that.
And it's kind of the shoe on the other foot, by the way, there. I thought that was interesting because you have Cal making the wrong decision there, trying to do the moral thing. And of course, it backfires on him. And then him being like, no, I can't leave my wife behind. And he's like, what are you talking about? Bigger picture here, buddy. Bigger picture. And then, all that stuff happens on the plane. Of course, he has that devastating conversation with his wife there. I'm there with you. This was a great scene for Sterling K. Brown, too.
He's really killing it as well. I mean, he's been the rock through the whole series, and he can cry on cue, and he can do everything that's needed of him. It's great to see him in this scene. It's great to see him in the whole show. I mean, I knew of him before the show, but I mean, he's just a superstar after this. So good, holding everything together. And again, that Cal's so lovely to him that he
Yeah.
gives him the phone that has the best cell coverage
In the
around,
universe.
so he can have that final conversation or not so final conversation
Yeah, that's
with his
right. Not
wife.
so final.
Mm.
Couple of things before we get to the very end of the episode. One is we have the red pill, blue pill. I mean, red card, blue card decision where he's like, this is the red card, but there's the blue card. We can have this global EMPs. Okay. Big question mark on whether that would have actually be feasible, considering you now have EMP devices in other countries. And I mean, EMPs traditionally, the way you actually generate EMP is by detonating an actual nuclear weapon. He could have said, I can use the nuclear weapons as EMPs. That would have made more sense. Instead of having these satellites that somehow could be EMPs, and they have to be detonated in the atmosphere. They can't be out in space. They have to be in the atmosphere to create this gamma radiation. It doesn't create hulks. It actually just blows out basically short circuits everything electronic. But anyway, that's what they're proposing here, that this is an alternative. And of course, there are computers on those missiles. So if you can fry the computers on the missiles, they'll probably fly into the ocean or something rather than hitting their targets. We assume, even though the missile looked like it goes right over Atlanta, we assume that one was not detonated when these EMPs detonated. And also the one that was headed for Colorado obviously did not detonate either because they were successfully did get there. Kind of a MacGuffin, obviously, but did you think this was a clever way to square the circle here?
Yeah, I like that he has something in his back pocket that he can just bring out. But the EMPs don't affect their plane. Doesn't affect Air Force One,
Right.
obviously. Yeah,
This
sure.
MacGuffin.
Yeah,
Although, and that's,
yeah.
you know what, my science corner, the whole idea is like, well, if I make this decision, I do set back the world 500 years,
Yeah.
which is totally made up because we didn't have computers 500 years ago or even electricity. So calm down there, Cal. You're not doing that much damage. And second of
Yeah,
all this does is cause a short circuit. So I can imagine that, someone who's really handy, you can take like 3 or 4 computers and like rebuild a computer out of it, and it would take some time. And of course, you blew out all the routers that allow the internet to work. So it would be really, really bad. Don't get me wrong, but it's not the end of humanity, the way he makes it sound. Ooh, first of all, yes, very funny. The plane's going to fall out of the sky now or glide all the way to Colorado because you blew up the computer. But the reason it wouldn't, by the way, this is actually true. The reason it wouldn't affect Air Force One, and they even say this, that it can withstand a nuclear attack, is because it is shielded, right? All you need to do is have a Faraday cage around the computer or around the device, and it will be protected from the gamma rays. There are people out there right now, specifically in those underground bunkers where those nuclear weapons are. All those computers are shielded. You're assuming nuclear weapons are going to go off. So you better be protected against any kind of EMP activity.
Okay, so we're drawing a long, long bow with this to go with this as a theory, right?
That's why there was science corner there. This is all blah, blah, blah. But fine. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. By the way, a lot of this might be true. Even in the show, you can imagine that afterwards he'll be like, I thought everybody's computers were blown out. And it's like, no, scientists normally put Faraday cages around their devices. For example, offices put Faraday cages on their windows to keep people from being able to intercept their, technology, like, kind of jump onto their Wi-Fi and steal their activity. So there are lots of devices out there that are protected, including government computers, for example, right? I'm sure Apple does not have their computers not protected by Faraday cages and other similar technology. All that is to say that you would be able to get technology going once again pretty soon thereafter. And this may be the text of the show. Maybe in season 2, we find out that areas have come back online pretty quickly and it's not as apocalyptic as they thought it was.
Yeah, well, we have to start thinking about season 2 now, don't we?
It's been announced. It's been announced.
And one more episode to go of this season. Final episodes of seasons can go one of 2 ways, or maybe 3 ways. They can solve everything, wrap everything up into a nice little bow, do that, but also tease something in the future, and also completely tease everything and wrap nothing up, which I hope this show does not do that. But the fact that it's only just been greenlit for a second season leads me to hope that it's going to be a nice ending.
In that one interview, the Billy Pace character mentioned that there was a 3-year plan for this. And maybe I don't know if I ever mentioned it here on mic, but you had mentioned it. I'm like, who knows? Maybe they meant this as a one-off, but apparently there was a 3-year plan. So I guess they were ready for it, and the ratings have been good. They've been growing. The podcast has been popular, by the way. Week over week, we get more and more listeners. So I'm sure the ratings of the show are going up as well.
That's good to know. Yeah, I've been hearing people talk more about this show. It's been popping up again and again. Yeah, so I think it's going for a bit of a late run and becoming more popular. Again, they ended the episode with a bit of a hook that the president was killed by someone that is from the outside.
A non-Paradisian.
A non-Paradisian. Okay.
Yes, foreign DNA.
How do they get in?
And with but with that, remember the rose on the jacket. So they're part of some cult rose society, somehow connected to Cain, the father, the grandfather. And this is, once again, I'm pretty sure not all of this is going to get wrapped up next week. So luckily we're going to get that season 2, because I had a feeling it's going to be one of those shows where so much is going to be left unanswered at the end. We definitely need season 2. We still don't know what the 6-digit number is, which of course was the first clue we found in this whole series, which kind of been dropped, but I'm sure that will pay off in some way in the finale. Like, speaking of the finale, we can do a little more speculation, but I did want to just touch on a couple more plot points. First of all, I love the fact that we have Sinatra at the beginning, and then when we get back, makes all her revelations. Ooh, I have this recording of your wife. It's very on the nose, by the way. She goes, I am Terry. I am Xavier's wife. Does she have a gun to her head? I mean, that's a very on point. And there's no ambiguity as to who she is. That we were wondering what that device is. Apparently, that's what it was. She says, you could shoot me all you want afterwards. But of course, she has his daughter as well. And she goes, ooh, I really do. I am a monster, aren't I? She really starts feeling herself there at the end. I would have shot her.
Yeah, a bit on the nose there.
Would you shoot her at that moment, or would you let her live?
See you later. I'll sort it out later. She was shocking, wasn't she?
I honestly feel that way. I'm like, okay, I'm going to kill you with you gone. Is this Secret Service girl really going to be so loyal that she's going to, kill my daughter when you're gone? I don't know. I'm going to take my chances. You're trouble. I got to get rid of you right now.
But we have to put in a call to our favorite bartender just to make sure.
Oh, yes, of course. She knew everything, of course. She knew everything.
Yeah, he tells the truth.
Do you ever think about this, by the way? I literally do think about, like, what would I do if something catastrophic like this happened? I needed to, like, rebuild society. There's like those books you can download where they have like all of human knowledge and you could print it out on papers. And I'm like, I need to get like a computer, an offline computer with a battery pack and a Faraday cage and maybe like an offline AI model. So I could be like, how do you create electricity from a potato? Like, I need to start making some simple machines around the house once the apocalypse hits.
Do you have a bunker prepared already?
I do not. Just my basement.
With a Faraday cage.
I'm in the bunker right now. That's what I'm doing.
Can't say I do.
No, but I think about it. I think about it.
Think about it. Yeah. I prefer to just to watch these things as fantasies.
You won't be ready when the nuclear bombs
I won't
start
be
dropping.
ready. Yeah, if there is a zombie apocalypse, I will be one of the first to go, I think, and I'll be happy with that.
That is something that annoys me about, like, The Walking Dead, for example, where I'm like, okay, the zombies, obviously at some point people will catch on to this, yada, yada. And I'm like, but it's the fact that the show is on for so many years and they're just starting to cobble society back together. I'm like, look, all these routers, all this technology is still operational. Why is it taking so long to just get a baseline society going again? I don't understand.
Yeah, get it together.
Exactly. Okay, one last thing before I let you go. What else do you think might be going on here? Because also hinted at there, you hear people saying volcanoes are suddenly erupting like in Iceland. California's had a giant earthquake, right? All of California is on fire. So there's more going on here than just the caldera exploding, right? Do you have any theory at all, or did you pick up anything there?
Just what the climate scientist said, that it ends when it ends. So it is just like a giant wave that will ripple all the way up the Earth to the Arctic and then come all the way back down. And he seemed to think it would just keep doing that until it runs out of energy. So, I mean, you can just imagine the absolute devastation that that would cause and would upset all the tectonic plates. And I mean, California is also always on the verge of the big one. And so, yeah, that's all that I picked up from that, that the Earth is just going to be banging left, right, and center, and it's going to be, yeah, very, very dangerous out there.
No, I didn't think of that, but you raise a good point. Maybe like if this is such a massive, world shattering, literally, explosion, that maybe it would like trigger other faults and things like that. So yeah, that is actually a good point. But speaking of that, the thing I thought about with the water, have you seen The Impossible? Did you ever see that movie?
I did, yeah, yeah. Fascinated by that film.
Yeah, and I thought about that sequence. Of course, it's happening in microcosm, but when the tsunami hits, and that whole idea, I never thought of it. The whole idea that the water comes in, obviously, and then people survive with that first wave. And then the wave comes back with all that debris in it. And it basically like, it's like a Cuisinart, right? Going through all these people. And I'm like, oh my God, I never thought about that. What a horrendous reality, right?
Yeah, that was an epic film, and they did that really well
Really
to
well.
show
Very disturbing. Yeah.
how you could just be taken, and you could be kilometers, miles from where you were, in this water that contains everything: sewage,
Yes.
trees, metal, cars, and you just absolutely destroyed, and you have no chance against that kind of thing unless you're in a boat.
Right.
And I've seen videos of these boats that just go straight for the horizon just to try to make it over that
Exactly.
bit of
Just keep,
white water
yep.
into deep water. Yeah, just yeah, incredible. Yeah, that the Boxing Day tsunami, I do remember that quite vividly when that happened.
If you were going to have a cover song in this episode, would you did you think of anything you might have come up with?
It's the end of the world as we know it. I don't
That's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah.
know.
You know the one I came up with,
Yeah,
which
go
is
on,
one of
go
my
on.
favorite songs, and it only came out. It literally came out as I was speaking the title here. I said, "This is the day," and it made me think about that song by the. This is the day your life will surely change. You know which know what song we're talking about?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's 80s, isn't it? That would fit the
That's
theme.
80s. That would fit. Yeah, exactly. I actually had to think because that's early 80s. So I'm like, is that 79? Is that? But I do think it is officially in the 80s. So it would make the cut. But yeah, your life would surely change. And if you guys don't know that song, check it out. It's a great song.
Well, we've got to see the code next episode, and we've got
Yeah.
to see the mixtape, and it's
Yep.
got to be released, and I want to listen to it from start to finish.
Oh, there'll be a Spotify playlist, I'm sure, of it when that day comes. So yeah, only a week away. This is very exciting. We have one more week.
It is,
Do
and
you-
it's just got better and better. I think maybe
Yep. Mhm.
one or two dud episodes, but
Yep.
yeah, maybe
It's a
one.
little slow in
And
the middle. I think it was a little slow in the middle, but I was still interested. I wasn't like so slow that I'm like, I'm quitting this show. Not that I would have at this point. I'm committed, but
yeah,
but regardless, I wasn't like, I hate having to watch another episode. I was always looking forward to the next episode. But yeah, this was definitely the best of the season, and this is what we've been teasing the whole entire time, and it really paid off.
absolutely loved it.
Okay, real quick, the White Lotus this week. Any opinion from you and your wife?
Loving the White Lotus. I mean, I could just sit and let that show wash over me. I mean,
Yeah,
it seems like the shots are amazing. They're using a lot of like long lenses, and
yeah,
the forest and the monkeys. The characters, they have real conversations, especially the
yeah.
three women. And I think it's just so interesting to let their conversations wash over you. And obviously, there's dread that's brewing between all
Right.
the dynamics between the characters. I just love watching that show. It's just great, and the fact that there's no little hooks. It just
Yeah.
happens, and yeah, it's cool. Did you know that it was going to be set in Japan this season? Of the White Lotus, the tourism board of Thailand. This is a story that I heard. Got word that it was going to be in Asia and in Japan, and they threw money at the production
Really?
to get
Wow.
it to be changed to Thailand. And I mean, whatever hotel that is shot at, that's going to be booked solid for the next 10
Oh,
years.
absolutely. Yes.
So it's probably money well spent.
I definitely have a power ranking there of my favorite to least favorite characters, but I'm definitely intrigued. I felt that season two was more of a quicker hook for me. I was right in there, like immediately with season two. I'm still very interested, obviously, and trust Mike White to bring it all together in some interesting way. I'm not engaged with all the characters equally at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Walton Goggins is not doing much. Walton Goggins is so fantastic in everything that he does. He's not really doing as much as I want him to do
I
yet.
like the shading of his character this week, actually. I think that they're starting to develop him. There's an expectation of what I thought he was going to be, the role he was going to play. And I don't want to spoil anything here in case people aren't watching, but just to say that I like the direction they took him in this week. He kind of moved to near the top of my power ranking, but I did feel the
Mm-hmm.
first
Mm-hmm.
episode, it was like, oh, I think I know exactly what I'm getting. And now I'm like, oh, maybe this isn't what I expected with given this next episode. I think they're going to take his character in a pretty interesting direction. What do you think of the theme music as a musician? What did you think of this version of the theme song?
Love it. Yeah, it's
I love
great.
it too, right?
Upbeat, and it's yeah, a little bit electronic in
Yeah.
parts, which I obviously enjoy. Yeah, I want to hear it more and more.
I actually listened to it on my Spotify. It's unfortunately there's no extended mix of it. It's just 2 minutes long, but I have listened to it numerous times.
Yeah, cool. Yep.
And my favorite of the three themes so far. Okay, in the near future, what we might be covering here, once Paradise, that's kind of a teaser of what I was about to say. Once Paradise wraps up next week, Mickey 17 is coming out. I'm a little worried about this movie, but love this filmmaker, one of my favorite working filmmakers. Although his English language films in general are my least favorite, but he's coming off of Parasite, which of course won Best Picture and was a massive blockbuster around the world. Very rare for a South Korean film to do that well. And it has played at a recent film festival and got rave reviews coming out of there. So I am curious to see it. I saw the trailer for it recently. Didn't like the trailer, by the way, but I have faith in this filmmaker. So very curious to see that and maybe do a retrospective on his career. So I sent you some of the other films maybe you haven't seen that you may want to catch up on, and we can have a little discussion about that. And then as far as shows are going, the following week, there is a show called Dope Thief. Have you seen the trailer for this?
Yeah, so I've been catching up on Atlanta. I'm just loving that show.
Oh,
And
so good. So good.
yeah, oh, it's epic. It's just so simple, but complex at the same time. And yeah, Brian Tyree Henry
Yes.
is in that. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So, and by the way, the first episode, at least the first episode, if not more, directed by Ridley Scott. So curious to see.
Wow.
He's produced a lot of shows, obviously, but this is one of the. I mean, usually he does like science fiction shows and things. So very curious to see him directing television. And this looks great. I love the concept of it, and it's basically my backyard. So I am curious to see something shot here. But that's starting the following week. So maybe something we'll sample the first two episodes. There's always two episodes first. So we'll sample those. And so anybody who's curious, of course, if you have Apple TV, it's on Apple TV. Everybody can watch it. So if you're watching Severance, for example, and yeah, we'll see if we stick with it after that first two episodes.
Okay, yeah, I like that trailer.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of other things coming out. There's a new trailer for Andor, which we'll be covering here at some point.
Andor is probably the most interesting out of that lot because I just loved the first season of that so much. So different, so interesting. So I'm not sure whether I should watch the trailer or wait to be surprised.
I have avoided the trailer, and I do not plan to watch it because I loved season one.
Okay.
I went in blind to that show, and I loved every minute of it. Maybe not the first episode or so, actually, but by the time I got to that third episode, I was on board, and that is some of the best TV I've seen in years. So I loved it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the heist episode and the prison
yes.
episode. I
Yep,
think
absolutely.
about them all the time. Andy Serkis.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you knew this, but the season, and I think this was structured the same way, they're premiering 3 episodes in the first week, and then they go week to week. But the Gilroy brothers, who wrote the scripts and directed that first season of the show, they wrote basically 2-hour movies. So the first 3 episodes have that big culmination, and then you really have like a different set of characters in the 4th episode, and then it culminates in the 6th episode, and then they were basically had this, and there was like a bottle episode there. We saw that one guy, I forget his name, who is like living with his mom and stuff. And then like, we have the last 3 episodes, right? So it was as if they had these 3 or 4 movies that all have these culmination points, and then with a bottle episode thrown in the middle. And I think that they're structuring this season similarly, where there'll be like a batch of episodes that have one story, and then they culminate overall. So I can't wait to see it, and it's going to be a long season. I think 15 episodes, so it'll be.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay.
So we'll be watching that throughout I mean, it's going to definitely overlap with the Alien Earth series, which is also coming probably in June or maybe even May, to be honest.
Busy.
So much stuff. So many more conversations to be had in the future. All right, Darren, thank you. That was a pleasure as usual.
Great. Thanks so much, Victor.
Talk to you soon. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye.